Uche was a young man from Port Harcourt with dreams far bigger than his small room could hold. Every night, while the city slept, he sat by his old desk, typing words that came straight from his heart. He wrote about pain, hope, love, and the struggles people hide behind their smiles. His quotes were simple but deep, and though only a few people read them, he never stopped sharing. Writing was his way of breathing. He posted daily on social media, believing one day, someone somewhere would feel his words. But most days his posts got no likes, no shares, just silence. Still, he smiled and told himself, one person will read this and heal. That faith kept him going. His girlfriend Ada was the opposite. She loved parties, followers, and flashy pictures. Her world was built on likes and attention, and she often couldn't understand why Uche spent so much time writing things that didn't trend. But Uche adored her. To him, Ada was beauty and fire, someone he believed would stand by him as he built his dream. He imagined her beside him when he finally published his first book, cheering him on as the world noticed his words. Sometimes, he'd read his quotes aloud to her, expecting a smile or a kind word. Instead, she would scroll through her phone, half listening, replying only with nice. He tried not to take it personally. He believed love meant patience, and maybe one day, she'd see what he saw in his dream. Every night, as the streetlights flickered outside, Uche whispered his favorite line to himself before sleeping. My words will find their home one day. He didn't know how or when, but deep down, he felt something great was waiting for him, even if no one else believed it yet. Ada's patience slowly began to fade. She had started dating Uche because he was kind, thoughtful, and different from other guys, but now, that difference annoyed her. While her friends posted pictures with boyfriends who drove new cars and took them to fancy restaurants, she was stuck with a man who carried notebooks instead of money. Whenever she scrolled through social media, she saw her friends living the life she dreamed of, and it made her question Uche's quiet dreams. One evening, as they sat outside a small cafe, Ada scrolled through her phone, sighing loudly. Do you see how Chitty just surprised his girlfriend with a trip to Dubai? She said. Uche smiled gently, replying, one day, I'll give you even better. Not a trip, but a life you'll never forget. She rolled her eyes. You always say one day, Uche. But when is that day coming? You write too much. Nobody cares about your words. You'll never be famous. Her words hit him harder than she realized. For a moment he froze, then looked down at his notebook. The pain in his chest was heavy, but he forced a smile and said quietly, maybe not today, Ada, but someday they will. Ada laughed and shook her head. You're just a dreamer with no followers, she said, standing up and fixing her bag. You need to stop living in fantasy and start facing reality. Uche watched her walk away, her perfume fading in the air, leaving him with silence and heartbreak. That night he sat alone, replaying her words. They echoed louder than the city noise outside. Still, he didn't delete his drafts or stop writing. He just whispered to himself, even if the world doubts me, I'll keep believing. Deep down he knew. Every dreamer gets mocked before they're celebrated. The distance between Uche and Ada grew wider with every passing day. She stopped replying to his messages quickly, stopped showing up when he invited her to his poetry nights, and started spending more time online with people who adored luxury and fame. Uche could feel her slipping away, but he still hoped love would win. One evening, as they met at her favorite restaurant, Ada looked at him with a cold, tired face. Uche, she said flatly, I can't keep dating a man who sits online writing quotes. I need someone who's going somewhere. Uche froze, the words hitting him like a sharp blade. Ada, my words will take me somewhere, he said quietly. She shook her head. Dreams don't pay bills, Uche. You'll keep writing while life passes you by. She stood, picked up her bag, and walked away, leaving him staring at the untouched food between them. That night, his notifications buzzed, not with love but with pain. Ada had deleted their pictures, unfollowed him, and posted a new photo with a popular influencer, smiling under the caption, Sometimes love isn't enough. Uche's chest tightened as he scrolled through the comments cheering her new upgrade. Tears filled his eyes, but he refused to break. Instead, he pulled out his worn notebook and started to write, his tears dropping onto the page. He wrote, they laughed at the pen, until it wrote their destiny. It was more than a quote, it was a promise to himself. That night he didn't sleep. He wrote through the pain, through the betrayal, through the silence of his empty phone. The next morning, his eyes were red but his heart was awake. Ada had left him for fame, but he knew one day, the same world that mocked him would read his words and feel what she never did, his worth. After Ada left, Uche's world felt empty, but he refused to let the silence break him. He threw himself deeper into his writing, using his pain as fuel. Every night, after long days of running deliveries across Port Harcourt, he came home tired, but the moment he touched his pen, something inside him came alive again. He wrote about heartbreak, about being unseen, about chasing dreams when no one believes in you. His quotes were raw and real, born from the ache in his chest. But for months, nothing changed. His posts got a few likes, mostly from strangers who stumbled upon his page. His friends laughed whenever he talked about his dream. "Bro, just get a real job," they teased. "You're wasting time writing quotes nobody reads." Their words cut deep, but he stayed quiet. He believed that even if the world ignored him, one day, his voice would reach the right hearts. During the day, he rode through the busy streets delivering food, sweating under the hot sun. He smiled at every customer, but inside, he carried his silent battle. At night, he wrote until his eyes burned, his hands cramped, and the city lights dimmed. He began to post short motivational stories, not about success but about pain, rejection, and never giving up. One evening, after posting a quote that read, "Broken people still bloom," he noticed a comment from a stranger. "Your words heal me." Then another came. "I needed this today." For the first time, his heart lifted. Someone out there felt his words. It wasn't fame yet, but it was connection. And that was enough for him to keep going. Uche smiled softly at his screen, whispered, "This is just the beginning," and picked up his pen again. One quiet morning, Uche woke up to the usual hum of Port Harcourt streets, expecting nothing more than another long day of deliveries. But when he opened his phone, he froze. A famous Nigerian celebrity had reposted one of his quotes. "You don't need applause to know your worth." His heart skipped a beat as he scrolled through the comments. Thousands of people were sharing it, saving it, and tagging their friends. Yet hardly anyone knew who wrote it. For the first time, Uche saw his words travel beyond his lonely screen. Strangers were connecting with the emotions he had poured into every sentence. Notifications flooded in, people asking who he was, sending messages of thanks, and leaving comments like, "This is exactly what I needed today." His follower count, which had barely crossed a few hundred, skyrocketed overnight into the tens of thousands. Each new follower was a tiny victory, a quiet reminder that his voice was finally being heard. Uche sat on his small balcony, staring at the city below, feeling a mix of disbelief and joy. The same world that had ignored him, mocked him, and called him a dreamer was now seeing value in his words. He could hardly believe it. His phone buzzed constantly, his quotes were being shared as captions in stories, and even on community pages he had never imagined reaching. But amid the excitement, Uche stayed humble. He remembered the nights he spent alone, writing while the world slept, the friends who laughed at him, and the heartbreak that had fueled his fire. Now, that fire was spreading to thousands of hearts across Nigeria. He whispered to himself with a soft smile, "They hear me now, they finally hear me." For the first time, he truly believed that his words could change something, even if just one life at a time. That morning marked not just a spark of fame, but the beginning of a journey where his pain, patience, and persistence would light up the path for others. After his first viral moment, Uche didn't stop. He realized that words alone were powerful, but when paired with his voice, they could touch hearts even deeper. He started recording short video monologues, sitting in his small room with only a lamp casting warm light on his face. His calm, steady voice carried each word with emotion, and viewers couldn't help but pause and listen. People began sharing his videos, commenting on how much they needed to hear exactly what he was saying that day. Invitations started rolling in. Youth groups, schools, and churches wanted him to speak. At first, he was nervous stepping onto real stages, far from the safety of his room. But as he read his quotes aloud, he saw faces light up, eyes glisten with tears, and smiles that felt like applause louder than any clapping. He realized his words were no longer just his escape, they were helping others find hope, courage, and strength to face their own struggles. On Instagram, his page transformed into a hub of inspiration. Messages poured in. "Your words helped me through my breakup." I read your quotes every morning to start my day. I finally believe in myself because of you. Each comment reminded him why he kept going through the dark nights, the ridicule, and the heartbreak. His follower count kept rising, but Uche didn't let it change who he was. He remembered the nights he sat alone with his pen, the sting of Ada's words and the doubt from friends. That pain had shaped him, and he let it guide his humility. Even with growing recognition, Uche stayed grounded. He responded to messages when he could, encouraged young writers, and continued posting quotes that were honest, raw, and real. He understood that fame was not his goal. Touching lives was. Every stage, every video, and every comment reminded him that the struggle had not been in vain. He had transformed pain into purpose, and that purpose was bigger than any applause. Just when Uche thought his journey was only online, an unexpected email changed everything. A publishing company had noticed his growing influence and wanted him to compile his quotes and reflections into a book. He read the message over and over, disbelief and excitement mixing in his chest. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but it felt surreal that someone else finally saw the value in his words. He decided to name it Echoes of the Broken Heart, a tribute to the pain, heartbreak, and struggles that had fueled his writing. The book launched quietly at first, but within days, it became impossible to ignore. Copies flew off shelves, online orders surged, and bookstores reported running out of stock. People were sharing passages from the book on social media, tagging friends, and posting stories about how deeply Uche's words resonated with them. His inbox was flooded with messages like, "I've never read something that understood my pain, and your book changed how I see myself." For Uche, these messages weren't just praise. They were proof that his words had found a home in hearts across Nigeria. Television and radio stations began calling him for interviews. Journalists labeled him, "the voice that speaks hope," a title that both humbled and inspired him. Wherever he went, people recognized him not for wealth or glamour, but for the honesty and depth of his words. He felt seen for the first time in a way that mattered. Even with the attention, Uche stayed grounded. He remembered the nights he cried alone, the mocking friends, and the ex-girlfriend who doubted him. That pain had shaped him, and he refused to let fame erase it. Instead, he let it guide him, reminding him that every quote, every speech, and every page of his book carried a piece of his journey. Sitting in his small room after a busy day of interviews and book signings, Uche opened his notebook, smiled, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." He had turned heartbreak into purpose, and now his words were echoing louder than he had ever imagined. One morning, Uche posted a simple quote on Instagram. "She left because I wasn't enough, but I became more than she imagined." He didn't expect much. It was just another reflection of his journey, but within hours, it began to spread like wildfire. People shared it as captions under selfies, saved it as wallpapers, and even used it in wedding vows. Strangers who had never met him felt the weight of his words, tagging friends and saying, "This is for you." The quote became a quiet anthem for anyone who had been rejected, mocked, or underestimated. Before long, television producers reached out. They wanted Uche on their shows to talk about turning heartbreak into healing, about how rejection could spark growth instead of despair. Sitting under the bright studio lights, he spoke with calm humility, sharing his story in simple words that moved the audience. He wasn't just a writer anymore. He was a voice for countless people who had once felt invisible. Outside the studio, the world was catching up. Walking through the streets of Port Harcourt, people recognized him instantly. Fans approached for photos shouting, "Uche, your words changed my life." Some even shared personal stories, tears in their eyes, thanking him for speaking the truths they couldn't say themselves. The same young man who had once posted quotes that no one read was now a familiar face across the nation. Social media exploded. Hashtags with his name trended for days, and every new post from him received thousands of reactions. His once small following had become a community of people united by hope, resilience, and belief in the power of words. Through it all, Uche stayed grounded. Fame hadn't changed who he was. It had amplified the message he had always carried. The voice that was once ignored, the boy who wrote in lonely nights, now echoed across the nation, touching lives in ways he had only dreamed of. And as he read the flood of comments on his quote, he smiled quietly, realizing that the very heartbreak that had once crushed him had become the reason the world was finally listening. The night of Uche's book event in Lagos was buzzing with energy. Fans filled the hall, waiting to hear the man whose words had touched so many lives. As Uche stepped onto the stage, his heart beat fast, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. He opened his notebook, glanced at the quotes he had spent years perfecting, and began to read. The audience hung on every word, clapping and cheering after each line, and Uche felt a quiet pride swell inside him. Halfway through the event, he noticed someone familiar at the back of the room. Ada. She was there with her influencer boyfriend, dressed impeccably, but her eyes kept darting nervously toward the stage. He saw the surprise and unease on her face as the crowd applauded the very quotes she had once laughed at. She shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, but Uche didn't let it distract him. He spoke with the same calm passion, letting the words carry their weight. When the session ended, people lined up to meet him, clutching books to be signed and phones ready for pictures. Ada stayed behind, waiting until the crowd thinned. Finally, she approached, her voice quiet and almost hesitant. Uche, I'm proud of you, she said, her eyes searching his for a reaction. Uche looked at her and smiled softly, the years of pain and perseverance reflected in that single moment. You should be, he replied gently. You inspired the pain behind every word. She looked down, embarrassed, realizing how wrong she had been, but there was no bitterness in his tone. He had grown beyond the hurt, and the recognition he had earned didn't need validation from anyone. Ada nodded silently, offering a small smile, and Uche turned to greet the next fan, carrying himself with the quiet strength of someone who had transformed heartbreak into a legacy. In that unexpected encounter, carrying only the proof that persistence, humility, and belief in oneself could turn rejection into triumph. Weeks after the Lagos event, Uche scrolled through Instagram during a quiet evening at home. As he moved past fan messages and congratulatory posts, one profile caught his eye. Ada's. Curiosity pulled him closer, and what he saw made him pause. There she was, posting selfies and lifestyle shots, but the captions weren't her own words anymore. They were his quotes, the very ones she had once mocked, laughed at, and called meaningless. One post read, "Sometimes losing him was the lesson," paired with a picture of her smiling in a cafe. Another said, "The dreamer became the story," with her sipping coffee while the sunlight hit her perfectly. Uche stared at the screen for a long moment, a quiet smile forming on his lips. The realization settled in gently. He didn't need revenge, drama, or to prove anything to her anymore. His success, his words, and the impact he had on thousands of lives already spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. He scrolled further and saw fans tagging her in comments, saying things like, "You used his quote. And that's Uche's words, not yours." Uche chuckled softly, shaking his head. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that the same words she had once dismissed now had influence over her online persona. But it wasn't bitterness or triumph he felt, it was closure. He leaned back, letting the tension leave his shoulders. The path from heartbreak to recognition had been long, filled with nights of doubt and quiet perseverance. Seeing Ada unknowingly honor the very words she had ridiculed was like a gentle nod from life itself. Success didn't have to humiliate her. It didn't have to gloat. It simply existed, undeniable and real. Uche put down his phone feeling light. The boy who had been ignored, the dreamer who had been laughed at, had become a voice people listened to, shared and cherished. And in that moment, he realized that the sweetest revenge wasn't in anger or pride. It was in living fully, achieving his dreams, and letting his words, his story, and his legacy speak for themselves. With his book a nationwide success and his quotes touching thousands, Uche realized he wanted to do more than inspire online. He launched a nonprofit called The Voice Project, aimed at helping young writers and poets share their work with the world. He wanted to give others the same chance he had fought for, a platform where words mattered, where voices once ignored could be heard and celebrated. The project took off quickly. Uche traveled across Nigeria and eventually around Africa, visiting schools, youth centers, and cultural festivals. He held workshops on writing, storytelling, and turning personal pain into art. Everywhere he went, he spoke about heartbreak, rejection, and perseverance, showing young people that their struggles could become their strength. The audiences were captivated by his calm voice and raw honesty. Many would come up afterward, sharing their own stories, thanking him for teaching them that failure wasn't the end, it was a beginning. Journalists took notice, writing glowing articles with headlines like, "The Man Whose Words Moved a Generation." Newspapers, magazines, and online platforms celebrated Uche not just as a writer, but as a mentor, a guide, and a symbol of hope for young Africans chasing dreams against all odds. His influence went beyond Instagram. His quotes were now printed on buses, classrooms, and office walls, reaching people who might never have gone online to read them. Through it all, Uche stayed humble. He remembered the nights of loneliness, the heartbreak that fueled his early writing, and the friends and critics who had doubted him. Every thank you note, every handshake, and every tearful story reminded him why he had started in the first place. From the boy who scribbled in a small room in Port Harcourt to the man whose words traveled across Africa, Uche had completed a full circle. His life was no longer just about chasing fame. It was about building value, lifting others, and proving that even the smallest voice, when nurtured with passion and persistence, could echo far beyond imagination. And everywhere he went, people didn't just know his name. They felt the power of his story, the heartbeat behind every quote, and the hope that he had inspired in them. The sun was dipping low over Port Harcourt, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. Uche sat on the edge of a rooftop, his legs dangling over the side, a notebook open on his lap. The breeze ruffled the pages as he wrote, his pen moving almost automatically, carrying thoughts that had been years in the making. The city below buzzed with life, but up here, it felt peaceful. A quiet place to reflect on a journey that had started with heartbreak and doubt. He flipped through the pages of his old notebook and paused at the very first quote he had written after Ada left. They laughed at the pen until it wrote their destiny. A small smile spread across his face. The words felt alive, more powerful now than the day he wrote them. He whispered softly to himself, "Maybe I wasn't meant to be famous. Maybe I was meant to be remembered." The thought brought a warm calmness, a sense of fulfillment that fame alone could never provide. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the rooftops, Uche leaned back and let his mind wander. He remembered the nights of rejection, the lonely deliveries, the endless hours spent writing while the world ignored him. And now, years later, his words were everywhere, on buses, in classrooms, on social media, and most importantly, in the hearts of thousands of people he would never meet. He closed his eyes and whispered aloud, letting the words carry across the rooftop and into the fading light. "They said I'd never be known. Now my words live in hearts that never even met me." For the first time, he felt complete, not because of recognition, but because he had turned pain into purpose, heartbreak into hope. Uche opened his notebook one last time and wrote his final line. A lesson for anyone chasing dreams. Don't chase fame, build value. Fame will chase you. He watched the last rays of the sun disappear behind the skyline, knowing his journey had created something that would outlive him. A legacy of hope, resilience, and the power of words. The camera fades to black, leaving his message lingering in the hearts of everyone who watches.